What are lakes and ponds? The dictionary defines them as simply bodies of water surrounded by land. But that seems way too simple. There's got to be more to it than that. Lakes are vital ecosystems that are supporting life both in them, on them, and around them. They are critical for life here on Earth.
So how many different kinds of lakes are there? Well, scientists have classified lakes down to about 11 different categories, 11 different types. There's shoreline lakes. These are lakes that occur between like islands and a mainland, what we might call lagoons or things, but they're not connected directly to the ocean. There's also anthropogenic lakes. Anthropogenic simply means created by man. These are man-made lakes, such as the lakes that occur like Lake Martin. Lake Martin here in Alabama is an anthropogenic lake. We've dammed up a river, the river is backed up and has created this lake. We have meteorite lakes. If you have a meteorite impact, a crater that occurs with a substrate that has clay or rock or some other kind that will retain water, then as rains come or other things happen, that area will fill up with water and create a lake. We have landslide lakes. A landslide lake is where you have a river at the bottom of a cliff and a landslide happens and all that earthen material comes down and blocks that river, creating a lake behind it. We have solution lakes, also known as sinkhole lakes. If you have a limestone substrate that slowly erodes and dissolves over time, creating a cavern, when the ceiling of that cavern collapses, if that collapse allows that area to fill up with water, we now have a sinkhole lake. Look in western Kentucky or central Florida for a bunch of those solution or sinkhole lakes. We have aeolian. An aeolian lake is a wind-driven lake. Usually in arid areas, when there's a rainfall in one area, severe winds can blow, real strong winds can blow that water over into another area, and it can actually create a lake when that occurs. We have organic lakes. An organic lake is one that's created, let's say, by a beaver. A beaver comes in and there's a creek, and the beaver says this is a great place to build a house and raise a family. So I'm going to cut down trees and build that dam, stop up the lake, and create a habitat that's suitable for my family to be raised. That's an example of an organic lake. We have volcanic lakes, such as Crater Lake out in Oregon, where you have the caldera of an extinct volcano that is now filled with water and has created a lake inside of it. We have glacial lakes, like those up in the Great Lakes are great examples of glacial lakes. This is where the glaciers, as they were retreating, gouged out huge areas of land, of earth, and all the drainage from those glaciers as they were receding left behind all of those waters to fill those lakes. We can have tectonic lakes. These are usually really deep lakes. But this is where you have the meeting of two tectonic plates where because of one thing or another, they've pulled apart or slid around and they've dug a trench, and that trench has been filled up with water. That's an example of a tectonic lake. And the last one, and probably the ones that you are most familiar with, are the fluvial lakes. These are lakes associated with rivers, such as oxbows, where you have a big meander in a lake or a big meander in a river, and that meander through time, through weathering and erosion, gets cut off, and it left behind this big horseshoe-shaped lake in association with rivers. Check all up and down the Mississippi or other major river systems for examples of fluvial lakes. Question is now, okay, we're talking about a lake, but what's the difference between a lake and a pond? Come with me and I'll show you.
Try it again. Okay, this is take two. Because I forgot to turn on the microphone. Oh, that's a beer can. Never mind. So, ponds versus lakes. That's a pond.
One of the ways that you can tell, of course, the main difference between a pond and a lake is that they're spelled different, right? I mean, they each have 4 letters, but they're all different letters, but really that's not important right now for our discussion. So just forget I said all that. The main difference is this. Scientifically, there is no definition that distinguishes a lake from a pond. Typically, we think of lakes as being big and ponds as being small. When I worked for the Park Service in Minnesota, we used to define it as a lake was greater than 10 acres and a pond was less than 10 acres. But there's more to it than that. Typically, ponds tend to be shallow. Lakes tend to be deep. How deep? Well, as much as like 40 meters deep. It has to be deep enough that sunlight cannot hit the bottom, so that the bottom is what's called aphotic. It's an aphotic zone. That means there's no sunlight that ever reaches there. What that means is that the bottom of lakes are devoid, the bottoms of lakes are devoid of any kind of vegetation that can photosynthesize. Ponds tend to be shallow. The light tends to penetrate all the way down, and anywhere you go in a pond, oftentimes you will find vegetation. That really seems to be the main difference. Shallow or not shallow. Although I think size, yeah, lakes are big. That's just lakes are big, right? I mean, come on. Could you imagine Pond Erie or Pond Superior? I don't think so. Although the British say we have to cross the pond to get to America. But what do they know? Lakes and ponds. One more type of wetland area that we have to talk about. Come on, I'll show you it. Actually, it's over there, that way. Behind me is what we call a vernal pond. These things are unique when it comes to lakes and ponds because these happen. Vernal means spring. These happens when the winter and spring rains come and build up pools of water in the middle of the woods, in the middle of fields, in the middle of pastures. These ponds right here have no water coming into them and no water going out of them. This makes a unique breeding ground for all kinds of insects, all kinds of small tiny frogs like the spring peeper. This is ideal because their larvae, their tadpoles are all safe from fish that want to eat them. These are awesome ponds.
Lakes, ponds, and vernal pools. Critical for life, diverse in nature, and just plain pretty to look at. What kind do you have around your house?